This is the Aftermarket Radio Network.
Welcome to another episode of Business by the Numbers. I'm your host, Demarest, CPA with Paar, Melis & Associates. Last week, we talked about the quote-unquote biggest tax bill in history, or so it's being called in the press by the presidential office, and everything else in between. We did get some more information on that, but like I said last week, I'm not going to talk about it again until it's set in stone. There's no reason to revisit the bickering that we're seeing going on right now, but it's moving. And I'll give you a little teaser when we first start here. There are some couple surprises of what we're seeing. But again, too early to tell. This week, though, I am addressing a common question. Is my labor rate high enough? Am I charging enough on labor? What should my labor rate be? Or kind of a question along those lines. How to judge that, measure that, and compare that are exactly what we're going to talk about this week. Before we get into that, I just want to stop and say thank you to you and the rest of the dedicated listeners. Remember, if you want your question answered on here, you just have a question for me or something in between, shoot me an email at podcast@parmelis.com. We got a couple really good questions. You'll actually hear next week. We're going to do a mailbox episode where we're going to go down through a couple of those questions that we've had over the last couple of weeks. But again, you want to hear your question on here, just have something for me, shoot me an email. Always going to respond. You want to talk to us about what Paar Melis can do for your auto repair shop, shoot us a text at 301-307-5413. And lastly, but not leastly, we cannot forget our dedicated sponsors for being such loyal supporters of the show. If you need to hire that next rock star for your team, or you just need to hire the next person, give Promotive a call, and I'm sure they can help you out. It's time to hire a superstar for your business. What a grind you have in front of you. Great news. You don't have to go at it alone. Introducing Promotive, a full-service staffing solution for your shop. Let them do the heavy lifting and enlist your hiring partner online at gopromotive.com. So before we get into labor rate, I got to give you something on the tax cuts. I got in the notes here called Trump tax cuts. It's a little bit of an oversimplification because even he's not going to say he's cutting all taxes. But like I mentioned, we talked about it last week. I teased it. It's been in the news enough. We had to do an episode on it. But guys, remember, this is not going to be set in stone anytime soon. I don't think. Maybe they can agree on this stuff, but there's a lot of aspects of this. The first aspect of this is political. So even if both of these guys, Democrats and Republican, agreed on this, the only other thing they agree on is they like to argue. Even best case scenario, things that they agree on take a while. This is a big one. There is a lot more that they are trying to get past than I thought, which also probably means that it probably all won't get passed and we're going to see a longer negotiation here. But like we mentioned before, a lot of this stuff is not surprising. It's the stuff that Trump has talked about. He talked about on a campaign trail. Some of this stuff is just trying to make permanent some of the changes that they did last time in 2017. But we do have a couple surprises that I had to at least mention. So if you guys listened last week, you guys remember I gave you some guesses. One of the big things on it was tips and overtime not being taxable, along with Social Security. I just didn't see it happening. Social Security, which I think is a very easy and makes sense for the elderly, should not be taxable. We talked about that last week. Unsurprisingly, that still looks like it's on the table to give some relief to some of our elderly taxpayers. Tips and overtime, like I talked about before, there is a massive planning opportunity. I'm so excited if they do this because I think the next episode is going to be, now that this is passed, how do we come up with compensation plans to leverage this? Again, in practice, it is a very, very complicated issue, and I don't know how they're going to do this without massive amounts of abuse. But hey, even if they do this and there is massive amounts of abuse, wouldn't you like to abuse it for a little bit before they knock it out? So we'll see. It is a big surprise for me. It's going to still be a surprise if it's in the final bill. But as of right now, tips and overtime are still looking like they might not be taxable in some way, shape, or form. How they're going to do that, how they're going to limit that, how they're going to stop people from abusing it is yet to be determined. There were some other pretty cool ones in there. I'm not going to mention, like there's one or two on there that I thought were cool or interesting. They're probably not applicable to anyone listening to here. But two things that probably are, that might not be as, I guess these are probably even more surprising or just kind of more out of left field. One of them that came up, and we don't even really have any more information about this. I didn't look into it a ton because, again, like all of this is maybes, right? And some of these aren't even concrete plans. But one of them is a tax credit having to do with kids' savings. The way that I imagine of what this is some sort of federal level 529 plan. For those of you that don't know, a 529 plan is a college savings plan, or some states a college prepayment plan, that allows you to put money into an investment. You get a state tax deduction for it, and then the earnings on it are not tax-free from a federal level. You don't get any federal tax deduction for this, but it is treated tax favorably. Right now, really the only thing that you can use it for is college. They're opening it up, and you can do some more stuff with K through 12. Part of what they're talking about here in some of these changes is having 529 plans be eligible for a lot more things. And I imagine this is probably going to be similar along the lines. What is the argument behind giving people money for kids' college savings? I don't know. But it was cool enough, I'm going to mention it. It's out there. We're going to see what happens. Lastly, on this one, before we get into the labor rate, I didn't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. You guys get a deduction for the interest that you pay on your house. You guys can actually deduct the interest that you pay on your second house or an RV. That is the closest thing we can get to a vehicle. As of what they are proposing right now, you are also going to be able to deduct interest on an auto loan. We've talked about this in the past, and I think that the last time that this came out, I think was like Reagan era. But at that point, I think Democrats actually wanted to put it out, and Republicans were vehemently against this because they thought it was fiscally irresponsible. I still think that there's a large argument to that. I think that rewarding people for having a car payment or subsidizing high interest car payments is very strange on it. Probably good news for the automotive industry, though. You got a new car payment? Yeah, but the interest is deductible. Now, for you guys, does that hurt you because maybe people would be more attractive of getting that new car payment? Because it's like, yeah, I am spending more, but I get a tax write-off. But again, remember, guys, you're only going to write off the interest. It's not the entire amount. How are they going to do this? My partner has like 16 cars. Is he going to be able to write all this stuff off? I don't think so, but we'll see. They were cool. I had to mention it. Probably not going to talk about this stuff for another couple weeks, but if we have something come up that is surprising or something that you guys need to know about, I will mention it, but probably will not hear any more about that for probably 2-3 weeks. Back to the originally scheduled program of talking about labor rate. One of the biggest things that we get asked a lot is probably a judgment on people's labor rates. Labor rates are unique because labor rates are not a markup based on costs like parts, right? If you want to look at, hey, what is your parts margin on it? That's pretty consistent throughout the country because your costs are similar and what you're trying to sell them for is generally similar. Labor couldn't be more different. If I want to look at the highest labor rate that I have, I think my highest one is around $330. No, it is not a European shop. No, they are not in California. They're actually in Texas. And then lowest, we got a couple that are still double digits. I don't think I have anyone below 90 anymore, but I think I have one or maybe a couple clients that are in the high $90 range. Most of that has to do with obviously location. Those are not the same neighborhood. One of those is kind of in the middle of nowhere. One of them is not even in a major developed city on it. But yeah, we see labor rate all across the board. Another thing that we had to remember here is we benchmark all of your numbers. So we take all of our shop's financials, we look at your labor rate, we look at your profit, we look at your gross profit. It is not uncommon if someone is looking at improving their profitability that you are led to this labor rate decision. So if you are coming to this question of, am I charging high enough? And this is coming from a bottom line net income perspective, I'm going to stop you right here and say, this episode is still going to give you value. It's still going to give you some information about setting that rate, but it's probably not the reason that your profit is low. Why do I say that? It's a little bit tricky on here, but follow me along. So when we benchmark all of our clients' data, one of the big things that most small business owners are shooting for is, I want to make more money. I want to improve profit. So profit is the one indicator that we judge the shops on, and we benchmark it, that we sort it. But one of the things that we'd like to do is we'd like to look at correlations. What do we see that correlates with profit? Clients that do this have a higher profit. So we looked at sales. Clients that do more in sales should have a higher net profit from a percentage. And we saw there was no relationship to this. Well, what about people that have higher labor gross profit? There has to be some sort of study behind this. You have higher labor gross profit, you're going to make more money. We did not see that. We even looked at if you have lower labor costs compared to your profit. There was no correlation. There's no correlation with parts markup. There is no correlation with average repair order. and there is no correlation with labor rate. My shops with the highest labor rate are not my most profitable shops, and my shops with the lowest labor rate are not my least profitable shops on this. First and foremost, that obviously there is a correlation. Hunt, you're stupid. If I sell this for more, how am I not going to make more money? Absolutely right. But in the larger sense of this, if this was really the end-all be-all of what decides your profit on it, we would see a correlation or at least some correlation. You want a little bit of a backstory? We're going to do another benchmark episode here in the next couple of weeks because the 2025 report is coming out. There is only one number that is correlated to profit. One, and that is productivity. If you are more productive, if you are a high productivity shop, in our experience and according to our data, there is a direct correlation between your profit. When we looked at our top profitability shops on this, generally those shops were averaging 75 to 85% productivity on it, where if we looked at our bottom shops on it, almost every single one of those was averaging between 30 and 40% productivity. Some of those ones at 30 and 40% productivity had labor rates in excess of $200. Again, your labor rate could be an issue here, but it is probably not that easy. If we're looking at labor rate, the first thing that we got to talk about is what labor rate do you mean? Because what I see is people complaining about one labor rate, but what you're trying to fix is actually a different labor rate. So you might be thinking to yourself, Hunt, what the heck are you talking about? I have one labor rate. I don't do diesel. I don't do fleet work. My labor rate is my labor rate, but even you have two labor rates. You have a labor rate that you are trying to charge, and you have a labor rate that you are actually charging. Sometimes your door rate, often called your street rate, your posted labor rate, that is what you are telling people that you are charging for. Hey, my labor rate is $200 an hour in the state that I'm in. I have that up on a wall. What we are really worried about is your effective labor rate, because your street rate or your door rate is just that. It's on a sign on the wall. But unless your process and procedures and your pricing and your packages match up to that, oftentimes we have effective labor rates that are lower or sometimes much lower than your street rate. So if your labor rate is $200 an hour, but if you look at your invoices and generally those get discounted off and you only end up recognizing $100 an hour, then what is actually your labor rate? That's the big thing that I want to talk about here. And the reason I want to mention effective labor rate is effective labor rate is your labor rate. Whatever, if you're in a state that you have to hang a sign up that lists what your labor rate is, then you can't rip that down, right? You'll get in big trouble. Everyone else tear it down because it probably is not accurate for yourself and it's probably not even accurate for your customers. If your door rate is $200 an hour and you are not legally responsible to post that, and I look at your shop management software and you're averaging $174.55, why are you advertising that your labor rate is much higher than actually what customers end up paying for, right? That's like going to Bed Bath & Beyond and saying, hey, this is going to be $100 when we know that every single person walking in there has a 20% coupon. Hey, it's going to be $80. Again, this is not a marketing thing. This is not a bait and switch. That was a bit of a hyperbole to get this into your head. You don't have two labor rates. Your door rate is worthless. Essentially, your door rate is an input that gets mixed in with pricing, discounts, inefficiencies, and the output of what you see and what you actually judge is your effective labor rate.
Are you tired of spending endless hours searching for the perfect talent to join your team? Promotive is your full-service automotive staffing solution. At Promotive, we believe in being more than just a recruiting agency. We become an extension of your team, working tirelessly to ensure we place the right talent with the right shops. With our always be recruiting mindset, we're constantly seeking out the best professionals in the industry. We manage 90 to 95% of the recruiting process, taking the burden off your shoulders. When you partner with Promotive, you gain a dedicated recruiter and account manager who will work closely with you, understanding your unique requirements and seeking out candidates who fit seamlessly into your shop's culture. We'll ensure that every candidate we present is thoroughly vetted and aligned with your needs. With Promotive, you'll have a peace of mind knowing that we're handling the recruitment process with expertise and precision. We don't just match resumes, we match character, culture, and long-term success. Visit our website at gopromotive.com today and experience the power of Promotive's expertise and dedication. Together, we'll build a stronger and more successful team.
If you want to go into more about effective labor rate, how to calculate this stuff, we did talk about this. I mean, it's funny to say now, but probably a year ago. If you wanted to learn more than you ever want to about effective labor rate, go to listen to episode 128, where we really dive into it. The general idea on the effective labor rate, and as it relates to kind of the topic of this week, is my labor rate too low? Is a lot of times people's effective labor rate is too low, but their street rate is okay. Quick example on that one. My door rate is $200, but I realize in my shop management software that it actually works out to be $150 because I do a ton of canned jobs, a ton of discounts, a ton of coupons on this, and I end up pulling down my effective labor rate. So if I go down through and I listen to this episode and I'm like, yeah, I need to increase that. I can't be at an effective labor rate of 150. I need to be at 175. If I want to add $25, I'm probably not going to go increase my street rate. If you want to, you want to, but probably your street rate was calculator given to you for a reason. Instead of going and saying, hey, I'm going to kind of penalize my customers by my inefficiencies or my discounting on this and charge more and still discount off the same percentage, I'm probably going to go and I'm probably going to dive into my tickets and dive into the numbers and say, right now, my effective labor rate is 75% of what my street rate is. How do I get it to 85% by maybe getting some pricing increases and fixing that up? I would try to do it that way versus trying to just keep on increasing your street rate. Up to you how you want to do this. It really all depends. Last thing on effective versus street rate. Hunt, what percentage should my effective rate be compared to my street rate? It's not something you can compare. Don't try to compare that percentage to anyone else. Your effective labor rate is your labor rate. And when you're comparing that to someone else, you should compare it to their effective. That is an apples to apples comparison, right? To a large extent, your percentage of how much lower or sometimes higher your effective labor rate is compared to your street rate is all how you set up your business. I have a client, his labor rate's $250 an hour, but everyone pays $200, right? He does the Bed Bath & Beyond model, and every single person gets a big discount. It's just like a marketing thing that he does. But if you looked at that, he would actually be judged worse than my client that sells the labor for $195 and his effective is $195. So it's a little bit different. Like always, you can get comparisons. There is benchmarks. You can compare this to the industry average, but effective to street rate is a very tricky one to do so. Another thing to think about here, and again, guys, you might be looking at this and saying, well, Hunt, you are giving me more questions than answers, and that's exactly what this episode is. This episode is, I don't know if your labor rate's too high. I don't know if your labor rate's too low, but these are all of the stuff that I would be asking you if I was looking into it. These are the things you should be asking yourself. We went through effective, we went through street rate. We figured out kind of what that is and kind of the implications of how that affects our pricing. Are our own inefficiency, our own discounts, shooting ourselves in the foot? What about this is looking at this from another aspect of this, is when someone is looking at your labor rate of saying, hey, my labor rate is too low, generally what they're actually talking about is they're saying their gross profit is too low. I'm not actually saying my labor rate is too low, but the amount of money left over after I sell this labor and after I pay my direct labor is less than what I want. That's the translation of what I really hear. I can kind of get the argument on this because if you look at that equation, labor sales less labor costs equal labor gross profit. So if you want to look and you want to say, hey, I want to increase labor gross profit, you have two choices. You can increase your sales by either doing more or selling the same amount for more, or you can decrease cost. In a situation like labor, and especially for something that's flat rate and directly variable cost on this, there's no easy way to cut labor cost. If you want to cut someone's rate, then fine, but yeah, you're not going to do that. So a lot of times when someone says, hey, my labor gross profit is too low, they think that they only have one opportunity, and that is to make their labor sales higher. One of the things that I would argue on this is that aspect is exactly true, but you might be missing one aspect of how we can reduce labor cost. When I look at something, and if you want a general rule of thumb on this, your labor cost or your hourly labor rate generally is 3 to 4 times whatever your labor cost is. So if your labor cost is $50 an hour, most people would argue that you sell that for $150 to $200 an hour. I don't care who you are. You can argue me until you're blue in the face on it. Within reason, that's going to work for most all of you guys. The tricky part about this is how you come up with that cost side. And I will show you how sometimes people think that they're not selling this for enough, but they really are probably just affected by inefficient technicians. Let's say that same example. I have a guy that is $50 an hour. He's an hourly employee on this. And so I say, I'm going to go high, Hunt, and I'm going to sell him for $200 an hour. So that means I should be making 75% gross profit. Every time I sell for 200, I pay him 50, I keep 150, all is good. Now you're listening to this episode and you're saying, Hunt, you're talking about me, but I'm not recognizing like 75% gross profit, more like 50%. Like half of the labor sales I'm selling is going to my guys and half of it is going to me. How can only half of this be going to me when I'm selling this for 4 times my cost? And the most common thing that we see on this is your cost or your formula is correct. You need to sell this for 3 to 4 times your cost, but your cost isn't correct. If you have an inefficient technician that makes $50 an hour and they only are selling 20 hours out of the 40-hour week, you are giving them 2 hours for every hour that they're giving you. So if you want to look at it this way, that tech doesn't cost you $50 an hour because for every 1 hour he gets us at 200, I'm paying him 2 hours at 50. So for every time we sell for 200, I'm actually paying $100 out. I'm not making 75% margin, I'm making like 50% margin. So if you're looking at this, and I get the logic on this, you need to set your price. And we'll talk about this in a second here. We get to the market side. You need to set your price based on what your costs are. But you have to be careful here. You might have really expensive technicians because they're really well trained. They're super experienced, and I need to sell those for more. Great. I completely get the argument. And I think that your customers would probably see the value on it. You need to transfer the cost of your inefficient technicians to your customers. That guy that now cost me $50 and I sold it for $200, I'm now going to sell him for $400 because he cost me $100. You can see how there's a level of this where if you don't have the most efficient technicians, yeah, the customers probably have to pay for it as long as it's kind of a consistent business model. But if you have majorly ineffective or unproductive technicians on it, not only is your labor gross profit going to stink, you're probably never going to be able to price your way out of this issue. And again, your labor rate is not the problem. What I would be looking at to fix that is my productivity. You might have came here to say, hey, I'm not making enough money because my labor rate is too high. And that could be the case. But again, are we judging this in the right way? Last one on here before we wrap this up, and you guys are now labor rate experts, is market analysis. So at the end of the day, you should be able to sell your labor for as much as you possibly can without having a negative effect on your business. So if you want the official dictionary definition of what should your labor rate be, you should be charging as much as you physically can without having a negative consequence of being able to close the sale. The shorter answer is, who knows what that number is, because that is a very subjective thing and it's going to be different for each customers. But a lot of times we see this, and all the stuff that we talked about before is all very internal, right? It's all very introspective. What are our costs? What are our goals? What are our teams? And that's how we come up with pricing. And to a large extent, you have to price this based on what your business needs, but you also can't ignore the market. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that your technicians, for whatever reason, cost $150 an hour, but everywhere around you, they're selling their labor for like $150 an hour. Are you going to be able to stay in business if you try to match your current competition and sell labor at the same exact amount that they are? No, you are going to go out of business extremely quick. Probably one of the quickest I've ever seen a shop go out of business if you try to do that. Again, this is a extreme hyperbole. If you want this business to work, you're going to need to sell that labor for probably about $450. Now, I get it. There's an aspect behind this of, well, you got to be able to back this up. And that's where it gets to the market analysis. Be careful on comparing yourself based on price, because that example I just gave you where $450 an hour is my labor rate could still get you every single job. Let's say that you're a Lamborghini technician. You're in whatever, rural part of, take your pick of somewhere that you don't have a Lamborghini dealership. Do you think that that guy is going to be able to get $450 an hour? Probably. They don't have any choice. What is your competition? None. Maybe you got to tow it 300 miles. Now, if you are trying to run a shop next to the Lamborghini dealership, do you think that you can get $450 an hour? Probably a bad example. I wouldn't guess that their labor rates at the dealer are probably much lower than that. But again, you're next to a dealer competition. And especially for the exotic side of it, it is very hard to compete with the exotic dealers on every single aspect of this. Price is something on this, but what I always tell to my clients is you need to be conscious and you need to compare yourself to your competition, but I don't mean geographic. I mean true competition. What I mean by that is this. I have a lot of clients that go and they say, yeah, I got this guy down the street. He's selling it for $140 and we're at $180. And I'm afraid I'm going to lose clients. And I say, well, does this person have an alignment? Do they do digital inspections? And what you figure out is, hey, that person owns an auto repair shop. It is in your geographic location. It's not a competitor. McDonald's is not a competitor to Ruth Chris. They both sell food, but completely different kinds, completely different service, and completely different value. Give you an example on this again. Let's say that there are 3 shops in town that all charge the exact same labor rate. Which one are you going to pick? Let's put yourself into your customer's shoes. Probably going to pick the one that has the best communication, the best service, the best experience, the best waiting room, the best coffee, right? I don't even know. If we have the exact same prices on it, someone is no longer going to look at this from a price standpoint. They're going to say, hey, what gives me the most value? Who do I trust the most? Or who do I like dealing with the most? Now, let's say that all of these same shops, maybe you're using your competitors in town to thinking about this, all have different prices. Which one would you pick now? And again, I think you see where I'm going on this because your thing that you're thinking there is, well, hunt, it probably depends on how different this is. And that's where I go, this is not about price, this is about value. If a shop is $2 an hour less than you and the other one is $2 an hour higher than you, I would argue that you're still not going to be compared on price. Materially, you guys are almost the same exact price. Even in a larger example, you're $160 an hour and your competitor's $150. If your average repair order is $600-$800, we're almost at the same amount. Can you price yourself out of a market? Absolutely. Do I see it happen very often? Almost never. You guys generally aren't brave enough to really blow it out of the water. And like I always tell people, you can always go down on your price. It's virtually impossible and often illegal to increase it after the fact. All in all, this is your business and you can sell it for whatever you want. And I hope that you can sell it for as much as you physically can. But the deeper answer is probably a bit more complicated. Double your prices and do half the work. You're going to make the same and do less work. However, if your prices are 30% higher than your competition and you're providing the same exact value, you're probably going to see bad results, but the price isn't really your problem. Please share with friends. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, shoot me an email at podcast@parmelis.com. Thanks again for listening on the Aftermarket Radio Network. You can find all shows on the aftermarketradionetwork.com and on your favorite podcast listening app. Thanks again for joining me on Business by the Numbers. Stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you all next week.
You've been listening to Business by the Numbers with Hunt Demarest on the Aftermarket Radio Network. Follow Hunt on your favorite podcast listening app. Let him know what you'd like him to cover. His email is in the show notes. Hunt is all for advancing the aftermarket.